Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation on building a great fundraising plan for your organization. The theme for today's presentation is plan the work and work the plan. As some of you might know, a nonprofit fundraising plan is a guiding document designed to help you raise the money you need to achieve your goals. It breaks down your organization's vision into actionable, highly specific steps for success. And it doesn't matter if you're running a multi-million-dollar nonprofit organization or a small startup. The key to financial success is a well thought out fundraising plan. If you don't want to set yourself up for failure by just winging it, you're going to create a fundraising plan and process. So get your team together or go solo if it's just you, and get to work on creating your nonprofit fundraising plan. That's what we'll talk through today. Those are the steps that we're going to outline over the next few minutes. But before we get started, why don't you just let me introduce myself. My name is Chris Looney. It's nice to meet you all. I'm the author of a few fundraising books, the two you see here, for example, and the founder of the 5-Tool Fundraiser. Also recently, I've started a company called Altruist, which is a directory of service providers to the nonprofit industry, and Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership, which is a membership organization targeting nonprofit executives. I come to the nonprofit space via my parents, who were fundraisers, professional fundraisers themselves, and spent their entire careers raising money for different organizations, and in fact, for consulting firms as well, which is ironic that I became a fundraising consultant for many years as well. But if you do know me, you know that I'm passionate about helping fundraisers achieve their fullest potential. And that's really why I decided to start the 5-Tool Fundraiser, just to be able to provide a resource, a website that allows fundraisers to access training, knowledge sharing, vendors, and so much more. So I do hope that you'll check out the website in your free time, at www.5toolfundraiser.com. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, let's get into a discussion about a development plan, also known as a fundraising plan. So let's start with what it is. What is a development fundraising plan? A nonprofit fundraising plan is a document. It strategically organizes all of your fundraising activities over a certain period of time. Typically, it's 1 year, though I would encourage you to consider creating a multi-year plan. That way, you can just add an additional year on the back end each year and have a sense for your directional heading, not just 1 year at a time, but over multiple years. And these strategic plans chart out campaign dates and strategies, donor tracking and retention plans, special event details, a targeted communication schedule, and so much more. And in addition to being strategic, you want to make sure that your fundraising plan is flexible, that it has room to accommodate changes as they arise, because they will absolutely arise. If your fundraising plan is too rigid or formulaic, chances are you'll miss on some great opportunities. So the key is to have an adaptable fundraising strategy with set goals that will also allow you to respond to unexpected challenges and opportunities. We know this all too well, after all, with the pandemic. That threw a wrench into all of our plans, didn't it? And not being able to adapt to some of those moving targets. is a problem for a lot of organizations. Plus, we don't want to create a plan that sits on a shelf. We want it to be dynamic. We want it to be evergreen. We want it to change with our numbers as well. So before we dive in on how to create that nonprofit fundraising plan, just wanted to go over a few things you might be thinking to yourself, like what is strategic fundraising? Strategic fundraising is moving your organization's mission forward by really honing in on what you do best as an organization. It also involves the buy-in of multiple stakeholders like your staff or board members, some donors, and it maps out a path forward as you raise those funds. So a strategic fundraising plan is intended to keep you on track toward your fundraising goals by using your organization's resources as effectively and efficiently as possible while keeping your alignment with your overall mission and vision. So there's also the concept that the nonprofit fundraising plan is different from other fundraising plans. What do we mean by that? We mean that a nonprofit fundraising plan organizes your fundraising activities over the course of the year or two or three or more. And that doesn't eliminate the fact that you might have other fundraising plans that detail the fundraising campaigns and activities included within your overall plan. So you might have a plan within a plan, for example. You might have a very specific plan for your gala that fits within the overall fundraising plan. So don't be surprised if you build out connected plans that are more targeted and focused to individual initiatives or efforts, in addition to that overarching fundraising plan that you might have. So the question then becomes, why do we need a fundraising plan? Isn't it okay just to look at last year's results and try to move forward with that same idea, that same energy, that same plan that we had before, and just try to improve on those results? That's what most organizations do, quite honestly. But we recommend an actual documented development or fundraising plan because, first and foremost, fundraising plans get everyone, staff, volunteers, board members, potential donors, focused and on track to hitting your goals throughout the year. With a set plan in place, you can ensure that everyone is on the same page and won't lose sight of priorities along the way. And losing sight of those priorities is very possible when you don't have things on paper and documented and you're referring to them along the way. So it should give your team a clear idea of what will be expected of them as well as the anticipated results. These documents are also essential in shifting an entire organization's attitude about fundraising. Let's face it, fundraising is oftentimes reactionary. Problems such as an economic downturn or changes in federal funding can arise at any time. A better way forward is to have fundraising goals, which then dictate your fundraising efforts and your strategy. So a fundraising plan should provide a clear course of action focused on diversified funding streams, leaving everyone with a little less stress when problems do pop up. And it really all boils down to the fact that when you're in the thick of things, you're much more likely to come out on top if you have a plan in place to tackle those issues. So with that, are you ready to create that fundraising plan? Perfect, because now we're going to jump into some of the essential things that I would like for all of you to think about, things to really know before you begin to write out that fundraising plan. And I'm just going to chat with you here and talk through those 10 things that I think are really essential for you to know and focus on. And the first is to understand the history of the fundraising that exists for your organization. Anyone can look back the year before and evaluate how things went. You can look at the numbers, you can look at the donor counts, you can look at the participation rates, you can look at retention, and you can look at acquisition. You can look at how things stacked up year over year by program. So how did the gala do versus the year before, or how much did it raise last year? How much did you raise from state commitments? How much did you raise from your annual fundraising efforts, from the Giving Tuesday, all of that stuff. And you really want to take a deep dive into the results from the previous year, looking at everything that you did. What did the board do? What did the events do? What did your grants programs do? What did the corporate giving do? Know those numbers backwards and forwards. And if at all possible, try to run those numbers back as far as you can so that you can also see some of the trends. And I love it when organizations can look at, for example, their total giving over the previous 5 years, and year by year look at the total number of donors in that year, the largest gift, for example, or the top 5 gifts, looking at retention rates, looking at acquisition rates, looking at the median gift level, looking at the total contributions from the board personally, maybe even from influenced giving as well. So really just taking a deep dive, not just the previous year, but for as many years as you possibly can. And then you can get really fancy too, and you can start looking at how many staff you had in the fundraising department and what the average dollar was raised per frontline fundraiser, or total FTEs in the department, and really get a much better sense of what the fundraising historically has been. Because often the past is prologue, so when you look at the past, you can really begin to understand what the potential is near term in the future as well. You're not going to go from raising $3 million to raising $25 million. You could get there, but it might take a long time. So you have to understand the past to be able to build a bridge to some of the future goals that your organization has. So the next area to focus on are the actual philanthropic goals or expectations from philanthropy for, let's say, at least the next 3 years, maybe 3 to 5 years. And this is really hard because it requires not just the development folks to provide their guidance and direction here, but you're often looking at what the administration or the executive team or the board expects the development team to generate. And sometimes those numbers are outside of your hands. And obviously, I know how frustrating that is when you're given a number and it has no connection to sometimes reality or what you think is feasible. But when you create these plans, at least it gives an opportunity for the development department and the executive team and the board to all be on the same page, or at least for you to voice your concerns if the numbers feel too high, or allows you to come up with some options like here's best case scenario, worst case scenario, mid-range philanthropic goals, right? So you have different targets that you can hit. And, if you think those goals are too high, then it sometimes makes sense to recognize that goals are the aggregate of fundraising from different sources. So you can really target goals around each of the different fundraising activities you have and try to help executives understand that the numbers might be a bit unrealistic when you look at past results and when you look at some of the individual fundraising programs that you have, and of course, fundraising is so magical because there are often outliers, like you get an unexpected bequest or you get a grant that you didn't expect to get from because they weren't on the radar in previous years. But, that hope is not a strategy, as they say. So better to really connect the dots for everyone by mapping out the goals in the aggregate, but also the goals from the individual programs and how they all connect. The next piece is to really look at how fundraising and how your work connects with the strategic plan and how the relationship of philanthropy exists with the other revenue generating sources of the organization. And I say this because oftentimes there is a complete disconnect with fundraising and any of the plans of the organization. And sometimes it even highlights the fact that there are no organizational plans in place, growth plans, vision plans. Like, what is the vision, right? And how is that envisioned? How is the vision envisioned to come true? Because strategic plans oftentimes have lofty goals for programmatic impact and reach, but don't often speak to the step-by-step granular activities that are required to get there. And oftentimes it's a wish list rather than an understanding that there's financial realities. I could say that I want to I have a strategic plan to move into a $20 million house on the beach, which sounds great. Who wouldn't enjoy that kind of plan? But when it's not connected to my salary expectations or connected to things that I would have to do, like selling other assets or my current house or financing plans, then there's a breakdown. And the same is true with these business plans, strategic plans as well. The plans are only as good as there are connections to realistic steps and strategies to move forward. So the first thing that I often recommend to folks who are thinking about developing a long-term development plan is asking if they've already developed their strategic plan and have allocated certain fundraising goals within that strategic plan. Ideally, that's the case. You start with the development of a strategic plan for the organization that really does have a strong operational component to it, answers some of those key questions, and then you can sort of go after building the fundraising plan to support it. That's ideal. Doesn't always happen that way, but that's the ideal. And from that strategic plan, you're able to really define better the vision, and you'll know what the case for support is. Through that strategic plan, you'll know, for example, where the money you're trying to raise will go, what programs will be invested in, are there campaigns that are special and unique in the coming days? All of those things become a little more crystallized. And I always say that plans are strengthened, fundraising is better supported when there's clarity around what you're raising money for, and it's something that people can be excited about and get behind. So the strategic plan and case for support really are meant to support and strengthen the actual details that are in a fundraising plan. So number 5, we're making good progress here. We want to talk about the role of the board and staff. What are those roles in the past? What have those roles been in the past? Is this an organization where the board takes a real significant role in fundraising? Is this a situation where the board has been hands-off? Is this a situation where you can see that the board could really help fundraising succeed in the future if they were better equipped, better trained, if new board members came in with different expectations? But the board plays an incredibly important role in fundraising for most organizations, and we want to make sure that we understand what the board sees as its responsibilities historically, and what steps might be necessary to increase their engagement in that process. And sometimes the outcome of that analysis might mean that there's a certain board development function that needs to be strengthened. There's a certain training function that needs to be added. There might be the need to change the complexion of the board, change the capacity of the board. And sometimes there just might be a whole host of expectations that need to be layered onto the board to get them to step up their performance. But you don't know that until you really understand what the board's capabilities are, what their limitations are, what their history has been. But it needs to be determined, studied, analyzed before you start mapping out a plan for the future. And in the same way, there's obviously a huge need to contemplate staffing as you project goals for the future. If the organization has always had just one person working in development, that's a far different situation than if you have 50, 100, or more people in development that are contributing to the revenue generating. So really what you're trying to do is assess the staff's contribution, the way things are organized, understand if there are performance issues in certain areas or with certain individuals, and what sort of modifications might be necessary in the future in order to hit what will presumably be larger fundraising goals in the future. All very sort of necessary and falling under the category, if you don't know where you've been or who you are or where you are, you're not likely to find the right destination in the future. So analyzing board contributions, board participation, or evaluating the staffing sort of contributions in the sense of what those roles are, responsibilities are, how the staff has been organized, what the numbers are, what the contributions per FTE are on average, and how that compares with peers or aspirant peers is incredibly important. It's quite possible that in order to complete this analysis successfully, you might really need to be in touch with other organizations that you admire, who have a sort of a similar type of staffing structure, to understand what their realities are, so you can peg your results against some of those other organizations and either aspire to reach or exceed those benchmarks, or even figure out how to build a better mousetrap and exceed those sort of expectations as well. And I suppose it's helpful at this point in time to acknowledge the fact that when we're talking about assessing all of these things that you want to know before you begin to write your fundraising plan, or if you're hoping to engage in a process to develop a one-year, multi-year development or fundraising plan, it's not uncommon to engage fundraising counsel in this process. They, for example, will have the history of working with other organizations to uncover these things. They'll know where to look. They'll know what to assess. They'll know how to engage with other organizations or find the resources that will allow you to compare your historic results against others. They'll know what's reasonable and unreasonable from a performance standpoint going forward. So, maybe there is a need to engage fundraising counsel in this activity of yours to understand where you've been, or to create the plan for the future, or both. It's not something you should be shy to do, because so many organizations do take that step. But if you're committed to doing this work yourself, that's not a problem whatsoever, because you can do it. These are just some of the things, we've been through 5 of them, that I know to be important through in completing that process. So let's get into number 6. Number 6 is the mechanisms for fundraising currently used and how you might propose to use them or adopt new ones in the future. So what do I mean by this, mechanisms? Well, fundraising mechanisms are the activities and the ways that you raise money currently. So for example, typically, as we think about fundraising organizations, there are gifts from individuals. Those gifts from individuals might be major gifts, they might be mid-range gifts, they might be sort of lower annual support gifts. There's a whole strategy that would exist around individual giving. There's corporate giving, there's foundations, grants and other foundation gifts. There's your special events. There would be planned gifts, estates, wills and trusts and estate commitments, and gifts of other sorts like insurance or retirement plans, all of those things that would fit under the plan giving category. There might be a certain number of gifts that are derived from electronic giving campaigns versus a direct mail campaign. So these are all kind of different fundraising mechanisms that make up how your organization raises money. And another one that oftentimes doesn't kind of get calculated separately is contributions from the board. And I really think that it's important to drive into those numbers, because every board should understand how they are having an aggregate impact on your fundraising results. So being able to quantify that for them and understand the trends of their giving as a percentage of the budget, and in real dollar terms historically, is so important. And then as you think about going forward, are you sort of maxing out with some of these areas? Like, has your gala plateaued? Is there any hope for it to raise more? Or are you in sort of maintenance mode there and have to find money from other sources, which is totally natural and common? My guess is that you, as an organization, probably aren't firing on all cylinders successfully, that there are areas where you could really step up your fundraising success, whether that's through estate commitments, whether that's in the corporate arena. Usually people are always pointing to the capacity for growth in the individual giving arena. There seems to always be growth potential and more to do and better results from that particular area. But your organization is unique. And so you're going to have to understand what unique opportunities you have going forward. So then as we look at number 7, we get into the idea of budget. And I would be, fascinated for you to really look back and fairly and accurately assess what budget you had available to you and your organization in past years to raise the kind of money that you did. And of course, the budget is not just salaries, though that's going to be the lion's share of the budget as a percentage generally, but you would have costs for technology, you would have costs for your database, things that you would spend money on for research, continuing education, salaries, yes, of course, but also benefits, any vendors that you hired, whether it's a grant writer on the side or any and all of those things need to be jotted down. Perhaps there's even a salary allocation for the CEO who might be doing work as a fundraiser for part of the time, and you want that to be sort of fairly allocated to that budget, but sometimes that's not done either. But obviously, every dollar that you spend on development has to be weighed against the return and the dollars raised. And ideally, that you'll find that you have some efficiency percentage that makes sense. Some years you're going to spend more because you're investing in more staff and the return hasn't quite caught up to that investment. Totally understandable. But you do need to know these numbers historically so you can kind of hopefully get a baseline for the paradigm you live in, which is, if you invest $200,000 in development, you're going to raise $1 million. If you maybe, invest 400,000, you might be able to raise $2.5 million. So what you're trying to hopefully prove and understand is that you can invest more strategically in development, in the development function, and raise exponentially more, thereby reducing your cost to raise a dollar. And that's the constant battle you're going to be facing with administration and the board, is proving the point that if you can make this investment, that you will show exponential growth in returns. So the budget is incredibly important, and to be as thorough as you possibly can, especially when you're forecasting the future budget, trying to push for more money for this, more money for that is always the beneficial concept. If you believe, if your heart tells you that those incremental dollars in your budget will help you raise more money, then you need to advocate for that as best you possibly can. And hopefully history will tell a story that will allow you to get some of those additional dollars and really continue to advocate for those additional dollars throughout the year too, because there's the budget that you're allocated, and then there's the budget you can get when someone makes a gift, for example, that's specifically earmarked for hiring a frontline fundraiser, let's say, for a year or two. So there's all kinds of possibilities when you create a budget. And so maybe you have in your back pocket a different budget than the one that was adopted that says, this is the budget in the plan that everyone adopted. Here's the budget that I really want. And it, as you can see, it shows an extra $500,000 for this or that. And then you have the opportunity if someone says, hey, I'd really like for my dollars invested in the organization to be invested in the fundraising capacity, you know exactly what to do in order to transact that gift and make it the most impactful gift it can possibly be. All right, so moving on to number 8. We really want to fairly and accurately evaluate what those opportunities for future fundraising growth are. What is it? Strengthening the connections to the community foundation world that exists in your community, or the family offices? Is it ramping up corporate giving? Is it adding another special event? Is it transitioning to more direct email campaigns from snail mail type campaigns? Is it adding 5 new board members who each will contribute $25,000 a year to annual support? There are multiple answers probably when you think about what all of the opportunities are for future fundraising and growth. And I think you want to turn over every stone you can when you're thinking about those things. On the flip side, I think it's important to fairly evaluate and understand what the obstacles and challenges are that are facing the organization ahead as well. This is not a time where you can bury your head in the sand. This is the time where you have to really be able to understand that, the CEO just isn't interested in being a fundraiser. And there's a workaround that needs to be created for that. And, perhaps part of this process is understanding what the CEO's commitment to fundraising activities is going to be in the future, and establishing those as activity goals that are documented in the plan. Or a challenge might be the fact that the board has 70% of its members who give and 30% who don't, even though there is a board giving expectation. So what are the challenges around that, and what are some of the solutions that can be created to counteract that poor performance that exists in terms of board giving and board engagement? Are your annual donor numbers, in terms of the number of gifts or even the total number contributed, continuing to decline year over year, which obviously is a big trend nationally in development, the declining participation of individuals in giving? That might be a reality for you too, but there are certain ways that you might be able to overcome that trend, and maybe even reverse that trend. Do you fail to get a certain significant amount of gifts in the mid-giving range, like so many organizations, where you focus on some of the entry-level giving or lower-level giving, and you focus on some of the major gifts, but there isn't a lot of focus on the mid-range gifts? So when that's an issue, what can you do to create plans to help overcome that particular challenge? And there's just so many challenges that you could and should probably identify and attempt for the plan to help you work through. Again, don't ignore the elephant in the room. Try to really understand it and get everyone to acknowledge it, and try to work on a plan to overcome that particular challenge. And last but not least, and I shouldn't say last at all, because there are probably other considerations that you want to think about before you get started with documenting your fundraising plan. But the one I have here is something that I think is a failure of many plans that are put in place: the lack of accountability to the plan, and the lack of measuring what would you call that? Just a lack of measurement to the plan's performance. A mechanism, thank you, a mechanism for measuring performance. Who's going to do that? What will it be? Is there a way for you to, on a quarterly basis, jump back into the plan and do a red light, yellow light, green light kind of thing, where red lights are you're failing to do what you said you were going to do? A yellow light means you've got some concerns, but you're doing some work and you're okay. Green light means you're sailing, you're doing great. Things continue to operate as you planned and as they should. So, whatever those mechanisms are, I do find that far too few plans ever really see the light of day after they've been created. Maybe the goals themselves are used and evaluated on a regular basis, but not some of those other things that I think are incredibly important. The overall fundraising number, even if it's quarter by quarter, is probably measured, but beyond that, other things aren't. And I think that's where I really feel like there should be these internal accountability mechanisms that are created and performance measurement mechanisms that are created to help everyone fairly evaluate the plan and then to help modify the plan as you're moving through the year. Because again, as we said early on, being too rigid, not making accommodations, not being flexible can really hinder your opportunities for that plan to be successful and for the organization to raise a lot more money. All right, so let's move on. When it comes to setting your goals, one thing you might want to consider is using the SMART goals framework, and it's an acronym for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. Okay. And so, real quickly, in terms of specific, we're talking about what the goal will accomplish and how it will be accomplished. For measurable, we're talking about how you will measure success and how you'll know when you've accomplished your goal. In terms of achievable, is it realistic or possible? It's an important question to ask. Have others done it before? How do you know it's achievable? In terms of relevant, is the goal relevant to the problems you're trying to address? And in terms of time bound, when do you expect to complete this goal? It's just a framework that would allow you sometimes to set good goals, SMART goals, to use the acronym, right? And is a good framework to consider. You can find way more resources online about how to set that up in ways that are going to help your organization. And again, not all goals, believe it or not, are financial, right? Some of the goals that we're talking about creating in the fundraising plan might be activity related. They might be focused on how the team grows or how the team has a certain culture, the participation of different folks in the organization in fundraising. So not every single goal that we're talking about in a fundraising plan has to be connected to the dollars or the amount raised. And I just want to use that as a reminder when we're thinking about these plans. Of course, we want to know the numbers. We want to set objectives that are financial, but there are way more goals than just that. Also, once you've aligned your goals and mission, it's really necessary to begin thinking about exactly how you'll be raising those funds. You want your fundraising plan to be so detailed that even those outside the organization will be able to understand it. So you start with the types of fundraising techniques you'll be using, and including strategies like crowdfunding, face-to-face asks, phone calls, mail campaigns, email marketing campaigns, fundraising events, thankathons, your grants and matching gifts, corporate giving and partnership development, recurring donation campaigns, month-long focus on endowments and planned giving and other special campaigns, any capital campaigns that you might be running, and the list goes on and on. So when you've documented all of your activities, then you start really listing the steps you need to take before and after each of the above activities, those activities we just discussed. So what are those activities. What are those things we're talking about? You might need to train volunteers. You might need to get materials ready. You might need to talk to someone about setting up websites. You might need to take time to really dive deep into each one of those fundraising strategies so that you understand what those step-by-step approaches are, how long it'll take, what you need to do, what others need to do. And thinking about both the short-term and long-term activities is incredibly important. So like answering what can you focus on now and what fundraising tactics can you expand if your organization needs additional funding. So it's just incredibly important that you, from a rigorous way, really detail all of the methods, all of the fundraising activities, and all of the methods that you're going to approach for fundraising. And being as specific as possible is so valuable. When it comes to fundraising, I think we can all agree that personalization is the key. You wouldn't talk to a 10-year-old in the same way you would communicate to a 30-year-old, right? So it's that same concept with your database and your donors. Your donors aren't a monolith, and so you can't always achieve what you want through generic communications. That's why we talk about really segmenting and tailoring your messaging for the different donor types that you have. And you'll have to understand that and communicate your different approaches in your fundraising plan. One of the most common ways you'll see a nonprofit segment donors is by gift amount, for example. You could have a segment for small donors, mid-level donors, major donors. It's obviously up to you what those amounts are, but for major donors, that definition is certainly going to vary from organization to organization. I always like to think of it as a major gift is a level at which the gift will have some specific and extraordinary impact. And so whether that's $1,000, $10,000, $25,000, $100,000, that's totally up to your organization. But it's important because for most organizations, 88% of all nonprofit funds will come from just about 12% of the top donors. So it shows how important oftentimes those major gifts can be to your organization. In terms of mid-level donors, the threshold will certainly be different, but mid-level donors and mid-level gifts kind of range often from a few $100s to a few $1,000s. But they would probably be of a size that is a little bit larger than your standard or average entry-level gift. So then, the next tier is that small dollar donors. And small dollar donors, while just as important as mid-level or major donors, because they provide a foundation upon which you can build for the future and expand your work and hopefully grow major gift donors in the future, it's important that the focus here is really on stewardship, of course, and how you can repeat those donors on an annual basis. So once you're done segmenting, let's make sure that the messaging for each of these donors is just appropriate for the amount they're giving, and just really making sure that you can figure out a way to get them to repeat, either through monthly recurring gifts or annual gifts, so that they don't fall away. Which is tremendously disarming and discouraging for organizations when you work so hard to acquire a $1,000 gift and then they just disappear and never choose to give that amount ever again. So segmenting donors is going to be one of the keys for you in developing the right strategy and the right approach and the right messaging so that you can have the best opportunity to succeed within that individual giving arena. All right, so now that we've talked about all of this stuff, we've got just a few minutes left for the actual plan itself. And with all of the things that we've talked about, hopefully, it's coming into focus what that plan might actually look like, what it would, again, speak to, what areas it would cover. And this is a bit of an outline on this slide here that I wanted to go through just in the couple minutes we have left. One of the first things that I would love to have all of you start off with in your plan, your fundraising or development plan, is to have a bit of an executive summary, something that shares with the reader what they're going to find inside the document, both including the overarching goals that you have, but also some of the very key goals that are not maybe financial as well. So I think you really want to hit hard what the overarching goals are that you're trying to accomplish through this plan, so that you can get people excited about why this plan document is so important and necessary, because those goals are critical to allowing you and the organization to achieve the appropriate mission impact. But then we have a section or several pages on the fundraising goals in the aggregate. And oftentimes, this is what those financial goals are over the next several years. And sometimes what I'll do is, because I will have prepared a budget, I will be able to list the budget amount for each of those years that we're providing goals for, and then be able to share also the efficiency rate, the cost per dollar raised, at least the assumptions when those goals are performed to. And here you might also have that low, medium, high goal that we were talking about earlier as well. Separately, you'll want to list over however many years the plan covers the fundraising goals by source. So how much is going to come in from the board and major gifts, and from estate wills and trusts, how much is going to come in from corporate and gala, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're really trying to parse it out and help people understand those goals. And when I talk about the goals in the aggregate too, let's not forget that we're also talking about total donors to the organization as a goal, retention rates, acquisition rates, all of those kinds of things as well. And then we want to make sure that those goals correlate to the appropriate tables of gifts, which would show how many gifts are necessary at different levels on the table of gifts. How many $100,000 gifts do you need? How many $1 million gifts? How many $100 gifts do you need? There should be a connection to those, because you as an organization might be top heavy substantially with major gifts and require very few gifts at $100, whereas other organizations might require 100,000 gifts at $100. You just never know. Every organization is going to be different, but those tables of gifts really help drive your activities. And I say tables of gifts because if you're looking at a multi-year plan, each year would have a different table of gifts. Then we want to look at our volunteer org chart with defined roles and responsibilities. What are the board committees, for example? What are the other volunteer groups that are going to be activated for the organization? And perhaps there's a way to encourage increased engagement and giving from each of those groups, even if they're just designed as a volunteer group to put in time. Typically, we would try to find multiple opportunities to engage them in some giving ask as well, to give them that opportunity to invest their finances, not just their time, in the organization. Similarly, we want to look at what the development team org chart will look like. And importantly, the org chart should evolve over time. If you're looking at multi-years, who gets added in year one? What positions get added in year two, year three? How does the org chart grow as the revenues of the organization grow? No org chart is ever static, right? It always has to evolve. And it's okay if you're looking at changing titles, changing responsibilities, merging this, merging that. It's okay to have that org chart change, but it should be informed with best practices and an ideal look at how you can optimize your fundraising through your staffing situation. And all of this, of course, connects to the budget, which is incredibly important and connected to how much you will be able to raise. And the budget needs to be fairly detailed in terms of what costs exist for staffing, what positions, what kind of bonuses might be incorporated, how much you're going to spend on rent, how much you're going to spend on materials and training, all of those other things that we talked about. Then we spent a lot of time talking about the fundraising strategies by program and audience, and the messaging that needs to be brought forward. So this is going to be a fairly robust section where each of the individual strategies that you are going to approach are almost having their own campaign or plan within a plan here. So if you have 10 different fundraising strategies, you might have 10 or more individual pages dedicated to your approach for each of those. And then there might be separate plans that are created that live outside this particular plan, which is fine as well. I think it's always helpful to have a robust calendar of activities that is a part of these plans, so you know what actions and events are going to take place. We haven't talked about recognition yet, but recognition plans do play an important role in encouraging donors to make gifts and to come back and make gifts again in future years. So making sure that those appropriate plans are really locked down and make sense to donors and appeal to donors. So it might be a situation where you're really evaluating the success of your stewardship work, your acknowledgement work, and trying to constantly improve what you can offer and provide to donors in terms of recognition. The next one is looking at all of those systems that help you raise money, looking at your prospect management systems, your databases, your research systems, your acknowledgements, gift processing, your engagement in thanking donors, all of those things that are sort of behind the scenes, even some appreciation reports, being able to follow up with your grants and provide them sort of the accountability mechanisms that they expect and want. All of those systems need to make sure that they're operational and going to continue to receive attention. And maybe there are certain systems that need to be built, certain systems that need to be strengthened. One of those might be the mechanism for plan giving, establishing a legacy society, for example, whatever that might be, needs to be documented here, the things that you're going to work on from a systems standpoint to assist you. And then last, what we talked about earlier is this idea of a process for measuring performance and accountability. What's that mechanism that you're going to institute in the plan to make sure that this isn't something that gathers dust on a shelf for an entire year, that you're really going to have a group of people that look into it, help you evaluate it, and take action to make changes when necessary. So here we are with just a minute left, and I just wanted to provide one final slide for you all, and it's just a reminder. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can keep it very simple, but let's all remember that the proper strategy plus execution will equal success. So if you are able to develop and define the right strategy and right approaches, and you remain committed to and have the capacity to, through your staff capabilities, volunteer capabilities, et cetera, execute on those strategies, I have no doubt that you will find enormous success at the end. And with that, I wish you all the best, wish you a lot of luck, and would please encourage you to reach out to me anytime that you have questions. My email is there, the website is there, so don't be shy. Reach out, ask me a question, and I'll be more than glad to help. With that, thank you very much and have a great day.